chosen one, a warning just rippled through their camp. And it wasn't about your actions. It was about your origin. The moment your name surfaced, fear spread. Not nervousness, not doubt, terror. An emergency meeting was triggered because someone on the inside recognized something the rest had missed. This was never competition. This was interference with forces beyond their understanding. The warning didn't come to protect you. It came to protect them. An insider tried to halt the operation before it crossed a threshold that doesn't bargain and doesn't reverse. They had seen this sequence before, not the details. Those always change, but the outcome never does. Every individual who committed to moving against you eventually met resistance they couldn't explain. Careers slowed without obvious cause. Relationships fractured under invisible strain. Plans that looked airtight unraveled at the final moment. Not immediately, not dramatically, but with a precision that felt intentional. Meanwhile, you stayed standing. Your reputation outlasted coordinated pressure. Stories designed to define you lost traction. Accusations failed to harden into truth. When access was cut off, alternatives appeared. When paths were blocked, new routes opened from directions no one was watching. Each time you were pushed down, you didn't scramble. You adjusted. You landed. You continued. That's what unsettled them. Because pressure was supposed to break you. Isolation was supposed to weaken you. Opposition was meant to drain your momentum. Instead, each attempt seemed to sharpen your focus. Each setback clarified your direction. You didn't grow louder or more reactive. You grew quieter, steadier, more precise. The insider noticed the pattern in the margins. Missed outcomes, delayed effects, consequences that kept sliding away from you and landing elsewhere. They watched timelines shift. They saw how effort applied against you produced diminishing returns. The harder the resistance pressed, the more unstable the opposition became. This wasn't chaos, it was correction. And correction follows rules. What frightened them wasn't that you were fighting back, it was that you didn't need to. You endured, you absorbed, you adapted. Time, which was supposed to work against you, began working for you instead. And endurance, true endurance, always exposes impatience in those who rely on force. At some point, the conversation changed. You stopped being discussed as a problem to solve and started being described as a condition, a variable that couldn't be controlled, a presence that altered outcomes simply by remaining intact. They realized they weren't dealing with resistance, they were dealing with continuity. And continuity is dangerous to systems built on disruption. Because the longer you remained unbroken, the clearer it became. This wasn't a matter of strategy anymore. It was a matter of inevitability. You weren't escalating. You weren't retaliating. You were simply continuing. That was the warning that landed. Not that you would strike back, but that you wouldn't disappear. And some forces don't need aggression to be unstoppable. They only need time and the ability to survive what was meant to erase them. That's what shook them. You didn't merely survive what was designed to end you. You metabolized it. Pressure didn't crush you, it concentrated you. Loss didn't hollow you out. It carved away what wasn't essential. Each attack stripped illusion. Each betrayal sharpened discernment. What was meant to destabilize you quietly aligned you with something deeper and more precise. That's when the insider understood. This wasn't chance or resilience alone. It was preparation. A slow conditioning through experience, timing, and endurance. You were being shaped by resistance itself. Taught how to move through chaos without losing form. And when someone carrying your kind of lineage completes that process, the rules shift. Opposition no longer works the way it once did. Those who bet against such a person don't collapse through retaliation or revenge. They unravel through consequence. Systems they rely on lose coherence. Strategies fail under their own weight. Momentum reverses without confrontation. Not because anyone willed it, but because balance corrects itself. You don't have to pursue justice. You become the point around which it reorganizes. And once that threshold is crossed, the outcome isn't dramatic, it's inevitable. Your bloodline isn't about status, money, or records preserved on paper. It was never measured in titles or traced through official histories. It was forged in moments that didn't make it into archives: survival through catastrophe, continuity after collapse, renewal following betrayal. It carries the imprint of those who endured when endurance was the only option, who adapted when adaptation meant the difference between erasure and continuation. That kind of inheritance doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly. It waits. For a long time, you played small. You learned restraint. You stayed observant instead of reactive. You stayed human, vulnerable, uncertain, unfinished. Not because you were weak, but because you were gathering context. Because growth sometimes looks like silence before it looks like momentum. Then they pushed too far, and something dormant began to surface. Not anger, not vengeance, awareness, alignment. A subtle internal recalibration that changed how you occupied space, how you responded to pressure, how you moved through uncertainty. You didn't become louder, you became clearer. Someone noticed before you spoke a word. They felt the shift in the atmosphere of outcomes. In the way resistance lost efficiency around you. In the way time stopped working against you and began working on your behalf. They recognized a familiar pattern, not in your behavior, but in your trajectory. That recognition is what created fear. You didn't threaten. You didn't posture. You didn't signal intent. Someone who has seen these sequences unfold before simply identified the signature and understood what comes next. They knew this wasn't a problem to be solved, but a process already underway. Abort, they said. Step back. Not because you would retaliate, but because you would endure. Because you outlast strategies designed for short-term control. Because you absorb pressure rather than fracture under it. Because legacies built on dominance eventually lose relevance when faced with something rooted in continuity. Not through effort, but through inheritance. What unsettled them most was the realization that this wasn't something they could outthink or outmaneuver. It wasn't learned. It wasn't borrowed. It wasn't performative. It was embedded. And once something embedded begins to express itself fully, resistance doesn't defeat it. It only reveals it. That's what terrified them. Not what you would do, but what you had quietly become. That statement froze the room. For a moment, no one spoke. The usual confidence faltered. They tried to recover by labeling it superstition, coincidence, emotional exaggeration, anything that would restore their sense of control. But the insider didn't flinch. They didn't raise their voice or defend the claim with belief. They redirected the conversation to evidence. Study the outcomes, they said. Chart the timelines. Count the number of times this person should have failed and didn't. Track how pressure behaves around them. This isn't intuition. It's pattern recognition. Silence followed. Because patterns don't argue. They accumulate. They could see it now. The repeated near collapses that never quite reached you. The way consequences diverted at the last moment. The consistency of recovery that shouldn't have been possible. What unsettled them wasn't any single event, but the repetition. Failure refused to stick to you. Loss refused to define you, and effort spent against you yielded diminishing returns every time. You already lost, the insider continued. The only reason it doesn't feel like it yet is timing. Consequences don't arrive on command. They arrive when alignment is complete. There was nothing left to debate. The meeting ended not with resolution, but with discomfort. No plan, no countermeasure. Just the quiet realization that escalation would only accelerate something already in motion. Because the truth had settled in. They weren't dealing with an individual. They were dealing with a lineage, a line shaped by displacement, loss, survival against impossible odds. A history that didn't collapse under pressure, but adapted to it. Yea, your ancestors didn't simply endure hardship. They learned from it. Each collapse refined strategy. Each betrayal sharpened perception. Each recovery encoded resilience deeper into instinct. That inheritance lives in you now. It shows up in your timing, how you move just late enough to avoid damage, just early enough to catch opportunity. It shows up in your calm when others panic, Your clarity when situations turn volatile. It shows up in the way you conserve energy, choose battles, and remain intact when chaos surrounds you. You don't react the way they expect. You don't break the way they planned. Because what moves through you isn't improvisation, it's memory. And memory shaped by survival doesn't disappear under pressure, it adapts. And that's what the room finally understood. They weren't confronting resistance, they were confronting continuity. And continuity doesn't need to win quickly, it only needs to last. That strange knowing you've always had. The clarity that settles in when others spiral. That calm that arrives exactly when panic should take over. That isn't random. It isn't personality. It isn't luck. It's memory carried forward, experience compressed into instinct. Lessons learned long before you were conscious of learning them. You've trusted it your whole life, even when you couldn't explain it. That quiet signal that tells you when to move, when to wait, when to walk away. Others call it intuition. But intuition that consistent is rarely spontaneous. It's recognition. It's familiarity with chaos. It's a body and mind that know how danger unfolds because they've seen its shape before, again and again, across time. Now they're scrambling, replaying conversations, re-examining decisions, revisiting moments they dismissed as insignificant, asking how they missed what now feels obvious in hindsight. The answer is simple. They evaluated you using the wrong framework. They looked for power where power usually announces itself. Volume, dominance, force, visibility. Yours doesn't work that way. Your strength doesn't show up at the beginning. It reveals itself after pressure, after disruption, after collapse. It's visible in what remains standing when everything else gives way. It's present in recovery that's too clean, too complete, too repeatable to be coincidence. Your lineage doesn't compete in obvious arenas. It doesn't rely on spectacle or confrontation. It operates through consequence, through timing, through causality, the invisible mechanics that decide what lasts and what doesn't. While others focus on control in the moment, your inheritance functions across duration. That's why their attacks misfired. They thought they were targeting a person. They were activating a system. Every ancestor who endured in famine, exile, loss, or erasure encoded a response. Every survival became instruction. Every betrayal transmuted into discernment. Every collapse installed a safeguard, not consciously, not ceremonially, but biologically, psychologically, behaviorally, passed forward as reflex, as pattern, as an almost effortless ability to adapt when conditions turn hostile. So when pressure came for you, the response was automatic. You didn't freeze, you recalibrated. You didn't shatter, you redistributed weight. You didn't retaliate, you outlasted. What they mistook for passivity was compression. What they read as silence was assessment. What they labeled delay was timing. And timing, when informed by generations of survival, becomes a force multiplier. That's what they're beginning to understand now. This isn't something they can replicate or reverse engineer. It isn't learned behavior or a strategy they can copy. It's embedded. It operates beneath conscious thought, beneath planning, beneath fear. And once something embedded is triggered, it doesn't shut off just because opposition wishes it would. It adjusts, it compensates, it continues. That's why escalation only accelerated the outcome. Every attempt to overpower you fed the very mechanisms designed to handle pressure. Every effort to destabilize you strengthened the architecture underneath. They weren't weakening you. They were testing a structure built to survive stress. And structures like that don't announce victory. They simply remain, long after others have exhausted themselves, trying to dismantle what they never truly understood. Here's the approximately 1,000 character expansion, steady and symbolic, focused on awareness and alignment rather than literal claims. So you were never fighting alone. That's why pressure never lands the way it's supposed to. Why traps collapse inward. Why resistance aimed at you converts into momentum. Not because you wished harm on anyone, but because imbalance naturally seeks correction. Force applied without understanding has a way of circling back to its source. And now comes the part they fear most, your awareness. They could manage you when you doubted yourself, when you followed rules that weren't built with you in mind, when you mistook restraint for limitation. In that state, your strength stayed dormant, protective rather than expressive. You were shielded, but quiet. But awareness changes the function. The moment you remember what you carry, protection becomes presence. Survival becomes authority. You stop asking for permission to trust your timing. You stop overriding instinct to make others comfortable. You move with certainty instead of explanation. Nothing about you becomes louder, just clearer, and clarity destabilizes systems built on confusion. It exposes leverage that once worked. It shortens games that relied on delay. You don't need to confront what's been opposing you. You simply stop being movable. That's the shift they feel now. Not a threat, a permanence. And permanence, once recognized, is impossible to negotiate with. You're crossing the threshold, from unconscious carrier to conscious wielder. Not through a single moment or dramatic declaration, but through a series of subtle recalibrations. At first, it's almost unnoticeable. Your instincts sharpen, not louder, just more reliable. You stop debating what you already know. Decisions that once took effort now arrive with clarity. Your timing tightens. You move neither too early nor too late. You arrive exactly when conditions are ready. Your words begin to land differently. Not because you speak more, but because you speak from alignment. What you say carries weight because it's precise. People listen without realizing why. Conversations shift direction after you contribute. Rooms feel different when you enter them, not charged, not tense, just recalibrated, as if something settled into place. Those who once overlooked you start paying attention, not out of admiration, but curiosity, then discomfort, then recognition. They can't name what changed, only that their old assumptions no longer hold. You no longer fit the category they placed you in. You don't respond the way they predicted. You don't bend where they expected pressure to work. That's the warning they received, not a threat, not a forecast of retaliation, a recognition of transition. Someone observed the shift from containment to coherence, from endurance to expression, and understood what that phase leads to. They knew this wasn't about confrontation, it was about inevitability. Because when someone stops operating unconsciously, leverage disappears. The systems that once benefited from your hesitation lose efficiency. Strategies built on doubt stop working. Manipulation fails because there's nothing left to hook into. You don't need to resist. There's simply less access. Now they have two choices. They can step back, adjust quietly, let attention drift elsewhere, accept that the window for influence has closed, and move on without drawing notice. That path requires humility. Most systems, most people don't choose it. Or they can double down. They can escalate, push harder, apply more pressure in hopes of restoring the old dynamic. That's the familiar choice. The ego-driven one. The one that mistakes intensity for effectiveness. And that's exactly what seals the outcome. Because doubling down against something that has already stabilized only accelerates collapse. Pressure stops producing compliance and starts producing exposure. Errors multiply. Overreach becomes visible. The very effort to regain control reveals how little remains. You don't have to participate in this phase. You continue refining, continuing building, continuing to move with restraint and precision. The contrast does the work for you. The more aligned you become, the more distorted opposition appears by comparison. This is why the shift frightened them. Not because you became aggressive, but because you became unmovable. Not because you gained power, but because you stopped leaking it. Not because you changed who you are, but because you stopped forgetting. And once that threshold is crossed, the process doesn't reverse. Awareness doesn't go back to sleep. Alignment doesn't dissolve under pressure. What you carry begins to express itself naturally, quietly, and consistently. Not as dominance, as presence. And presence, once established, rewrites every dynamic without ever needing to announce itself. Because here's the truth: you don't need to retaliate. You don't need to plan, plot, or prove anything. You don't need to fight on their terms or meet their expectations. You only need to rise, keep moving forward, keep surviving, keep building. Every step you take, every moment you stand, every choice to continue aligns you with forces that already work in your favor. Consequence built over generations will do the rest. This isn't about luck. This isn't about fortune. This isn't a reward for endurance. What you're experiencing now is rebalancing. The universe is recalibrating around you, restoring what was always meant to flow your way. Doors that seemed sealed shut swing open. Resources that appeared inaccessible find their way to you. Timing aligns so perfectly it feels orchestrated. Momentum, once a struggle, now carries you. Effort becomes lighter, not because circumstances changed overnight, but because you have finally aligned with what was already yours. The path clears not by your force, but because it has always been waiting for you to step fully into it. You don't need to know every ancestor's name. You don't need to trace every battle they survived or every betrayal they endured. You don't need a lineage written in books, papers, or archives. You only need proof, and that proof is you, your survival, your presence, your persistence. You're here when you shouldn't be. You're standing when you should have been buried. You're thriving when the odds stacked against you suggested collapse. That is your lineage speaking, not in whispers, not in warnings, but through your very existence. It's encoded in your instincts, in your timing, in the way you carry yourself through moments of pressure. Every close call you survived, every obstacle you turned into an opportunity. Every betrayal that could have broken you, but instead sharpened you. That is the inherited intelligence of your bloodline expressing itself in real time. Now the choice is yours. You can continue playing small, dimming yourself so others feel comfortable, hiding your power so no one notices. You can pretend the pressure, the guidance, the instincts, the clarity are coincidence. You can defer to systems not built for you, rely on validation that doesn't recognize you. That's the easy path, but it keeps you limited. It keeps you contained. It keeps you human, but only at a fraction of your true capacity, or you can align fully. Trust the instincts that never fail. Walk away from what drains your energy, attention, or vision. Refuse environments that diminish your frequency. Stop asking permission to occupy your space. Move with certainty instead of caution, with authority instead of apology. Claim your inheritance in every action, decision, and interaction. When you do, the universe stops testing you and begins supporting you. Alignment replaces struggle. Awareness replaces doubt. Momentum replaces resistance. The invisible systems that once protected you quietly shift into overt assistance. Doors open that were previously unseen. Opportunities appear with a precision that seems impossible. Paths emerge that were always yours, but required your full presence to manifest. This isn't magic. It isn't chance. It's cause and effect, working at a level most cannot perceive. You are not being rewarded. You are being recognized. Your lineage, your bloodline, your ancestors' intelligence and endurance, they all flow through you. And when you operate in alignment with that inheritance, nothing can stop you. Not circumstance, not opposition, not even time. Step fully into it. Stand fully into it. Move with full awareness. Let what you carry express itself without apology. Because once you do, you are no longer merely surviving. You are orchestrating not through force, but through inevitability. You are not just present. You are central. You are not just enduring. You are becoming the axis around which reality itself reorganizes. And when that happens, the universe conspires to ensure the path that has always belonged to you is fully realized. They didn't just attack a person. They attacked a pattern. And patterns that endure across generations don't shatter under pressure. They recalibrate. They correct distortions. They restore balance quietly, without spectacle or negotiation. What they mistook for weakness was longevity. What they read as passivity was structural strength. The warning was issued not as a threat, but as a diagnosis. Someone recognized the shape of what they were engaging with and understood how these stories always end. Not in chaos, but in inevitability. The kind that unfolds slowly, then all at once. They didn't listen. Because systems built on control rarely recognize correction until it's already underway. They escalate where they should withdraw. They apply force where restraint is required, and in doing so, they accelerate the very outcome they hope to avoid. Now the activation is complete. Not because you transformed into something dangerous or aggressive, but because you became undeniable. Your presence stabilized, your direction clarified, your movement stopped being reactive and became deliberate. The pattern resumed its natural function. No announcement was needed, no confrontation required. When something becomes undeniable, resistance doesn't end dramatically, it becomes irrelevant. So understand this clearly. What's unfolding isn't drama, it's alignment. It's the natural correction that happens when something built to endure finally stops shrinking itself to fit smaller systems. You were never meant to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You were never meant to fight for space that was already yours. The activation didn't begin with noise, it began with clarity. From here on, your only task is integrity, moving in truth, honoring your instincts, choosing what sustains you, and walking away from what doesn't. Let consequence handle the rest. Let time reveal what pressure always exposes. They didn't lose because you attacked. They lost because you stopped forgetting who you are. And if this message found you, it's not accidental. You're not late. You're right on time. Stay aligned. Stay rising. And remember, what endures doesn't announce itself. It simply remains. If this resonated, you already know what to do. Subscribe. Stay connected. More is unfolding.